Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 113. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Monday, Steelers Nation. It is the league owners meeting week down in Florida, which means a lot of media time for Mike Tomlin, who spent the last 2 days, Sunday and Monday, having a couple of scrums and pressers with the media. So we're hearing from him for the first time since the 2024 season ended, which meant 74 questions about Aaron Rodgers and some other things as well. So a bunch of Tomlin related things to talk about today. Dave, how you doing?
Happy Monday. Happy last day of March. It is that time of year where we get to hear couple of sessions with Mike Tomlin. Not that there's a lot earth-shattering to take from those, but as usual, recap all of what he said and maybe didn't say in some instances. I think the biggest news maybe to come out Monday morning was Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network saying that sources have Aaron Rodgers having a throwing session over the weekend with DK Metcalf. I think he said out at UCLA. So that obviously comes on the heels of Aaron Rodgers coming to Pittsburgh a week ago Friday. Not much to report other than that. Mike Tomlin just recap said had a good meeting with him and a get-to-know meeting and felt that meeting went well, and really there is nothing other to report other than that. But I think it's pretty significant that Aaron Rodgers would get together with DK Metcalf to have a throwing session.
Agreed. It's funny. The biggest news of the day comes from a different Mike. Like you said, Mike Garafolo reporting that news, and it just seems to be the latest in a long list of signs and reasons to believe that Aaron Rodgers will ultimately pick the Pittsburgh Steelers. But as of this recording, a little after 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time Monday, nothing official has been put into place. And so at this point, Dave, I've been over the situation, just ready for an answer like you and like everyone else for a long time. But I just don't know. I mean, it feels like every sign is pointing towards Rodgers signing with Pittsburgh, so you do kind of wonder, why hasn't he just signed a dang contract yet?
Yeah, a lot of people continue to speculate. Maybe he's waiting till the big night out. How do you pronounce that? As a Yinzer out show in Pittsburgh that the Pat McAfee show is putting on April 9th. At I think TPG and all, and a lot of people continue to speculate that that's when Aaron Rodgers will make his decision to kind of, I don't know, get some press that way and all. I mean, I understand where people were coming from. I think McAfee tried to play that down at going into the weekend, but what's he going to say? What's he going to do? Ruin the surprise,
Mhm.
But you would have to think at this point, what we've thought for quite a while now is, if Aaron Rodgers seemingly looks like he fully intends on playing this year, and there's not many options left for him to go to, and you would think it's going to be Pittsburgh, and having a throwing session with DK Metcalf would lead you down that road even further. And we just wait for the official word, and have been waiting for the official word at this point. Like you, I'm ready to get it behind us. I bet Mike Tomlin's ready to stop having to answer questions about it. But until it's actually done, it's not done. Perhaps Aaron's already made his decision and told Mike Tomlin he's made the decision and that he's going to announce it when he feels right, and hopes the team will keep it under wraps until then. I suppose that's a possibility as well too. But Aaron's taking his own sweet time on this timeline, and like we continue to say, we just have to continue to wait.
As for the throwing session between Rodgers and Metcalf. Some people were asking, well, why didn't other Steelers get involved? Why wasn't George Pickens there? I assume this is just a proximity thing. Rodgers, California guy, Metcalf, West Coast guy. Where did Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf work out?
I thought that was
Last year. Was that
UCLA.
UCLA?
Yeah, some in San Diego, I think,
Okay.
and then some at. I think there was at least one or two at UCLA. I think there was. So that
That's
must
what I
be the
thought.
go-to kind of easy access, and obviously Aaron Rodgers being a product from close to that area, Cal, and
Mhm.
I imagine he's got kind of knows the connections to get him on the get him on the field though there and have those kind of sessions there. So uh, it probably was a proximity thing. It probably was impromptu more than anything. Hey, you want to get together? I'm out here. You're out here. Let's get together and throw the ball around the yard.
Right, that's my read of it. So just a commentary on why it was Metcalf, but obviously the Steelers connections are running pretty heavy there. All right, so Mike Tomlin talking about the quarterback situation. We know about Aaron Rodgers, waiting game, not really a lot of new ground to cover there. Metcalf workout aside, if it's not Aaron Rodgers for whatever reason, Mike Tomlin says he's very comfortable with Mason Rudolph potentially starting for this team. Said that's why they brought him back. No secret, they like Mason Rudolph. Have seen what he can do, led them to the playoffs and turned around their terrible losing streak in the 2023 season to win their final three and make the wild card game. And so if it's not Rodgers, Tomlin really shows that, at least publicly, we know the team's public comments about quarterbacks can be taken with a big grain of salt at this point, but he's expressing confidence in Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, I think just covering his bases here in case something, I guess, does fall through with Aaron Rodgers and, the team got Mason Rudolph sewed up, a couple of weeks ago now to a 2-year deal. And Tomlin's talked about the familiarity with him and how he's a good locker room guy and how there won't be an issue with him. He's grown up now. Heck, Mason's what, almost 30? How old is Mason now?
Almost 30.
I'll check
Almost
his age for
30.
sure.
I mean, where is the time gone? Remember the pictures. He's 29 and he will be 30 on July 17th, right around the corner here. So where is the time gone? It seems like yesterday showing the pictures of Mike Tomlin being at the Oklahoma State Pro Day to watch Mason Rudolph and James Washington and Mike Tomlin having those eyes for Mason Rudolph, and then the team obviously subsequently trading up for him to get him, and everything that went along with that. So you got a guy that back in the fold again, a guy that obviously essentially saved the season for you, if you will, coming down the stretch. Those last 3 games, what year was that? 2023, right?
Yep.
Come in after Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, and getting the team into the playoffs, and unfortunately losing that wild card game to the Buffalo Bills. And also, yeah, I mean you could pick a worse backup backup quarterback. Now, obviously, it's probably not ideal to have Mason Rudolph as your starter for the entire 2025 season. But Mike Tomlin is given all appearances that should that be the case, he's fine with it.
Despite Tomlin's public comments, how much is the team pinning their hopes to Rodgers choosing them under the assumption that Pittsburgh is continuing to push to be a contender, to win a playoff game, to break this drought? How nervous are they basically for Rodgers to say yes? In other words, how screwed are they, if any, quote unquote, if Rodgers does not sign with them in their pursuit of winning a playoff game and going on a run?
Mike Tomlin's obviously not going to let anybody know how he truly feels about that, and was asked about, I don't know if there is a plan. What do you say? I don't know if there's a plan B or C or anything along those lines, but I would think at the minimum, and we've talked about this a little bit before, if they got the answer back from Aaron Rodgers that, no, it's not going to happen, or I'm going to retire, or I'm going to wait and see, or whatnot. You can't help but think that they would at least explore options, be it Kirk Cousins in a trade with Atlanta, or being another low-level experienced guy to at least come in and provide some competition for Mason Rudolph, and at least at a minimum, somebody that you would have trust in to be a experienced backup, other than, and apologies to Skylar Thompson, to play behind Mason Rudolph. So I would think that, none of that will be known unless Mason Rudolph, or unless Aaron Rodgers comes back and says, this isn't going to work.
Sure. No, I agree with you there. And, I think publicly Tomlin's saying all the right things, obviously, and there's confidence in Mason. He's a really quality number two, but that's what he is. He's a number two quarterback that can spot start for a short period of time, not going to be a full 17 game starter that's going to get you where a franchise wants and where Pittsburgh really needs to go. So I think this team, unless they've received a guarantee, and even then, how much is a guarantee worth until pen meets paper for a contract? But unless they 100% know that Rodgers is coming to Pittsburgh, there's got to be some nervousness, because if it's not Rodgers, their ability to compete and get over the hump they've been struggling to get over for 8 years is really, really challenging if Rudolph or somebody else is their starting quarterback.
Yeah, look, you're trying to sell this to the veterans on the team as well, that you're all in with this. And I can't imagine that those vets like Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt, Mika Fitzpatrick, their level of excitement would probably go down a little bit if the fallout from all this is that, well, Mason's back, and that's the guy that we're going to roll with.
Sure, to lose two talented in certain respects guys in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, I think most people would rank above Mason Rudolph if you put together a list of the top 50 quarterbacks in the NFL. If you go from those two guys to Mason, who again is capable and can run your offense exactly the way the coaching staff is going to want him to, but just simply the high end talent's not gonna be there. And so that's the gamble that Pittsburgh has made, and that's why they're gonna wait as long as possible, as long as it needs to be for Aaron Rodgers to decide. I mean, the Steelers don't have any leverage. There's not gonna be a deadline. There's not gonna be a you gotta sign by this date, anything like that. And Tomlin just basically said that. He said there is no deadline that's not been talked about. It doesn't really feel like that's super effective either. And so this team will wait and wait and wait some more.
Can you win games with Mason Rudolph as your quarterback? The answer to that's yes. You've won games with Mason Rudolph as your quarterback before. How many more games is the addition with the roster as is right now prior to the draft? And obviously, you're going to get some pieces in the draft and all, and hopefully some impactful ones at that. But how much does Aaron Rodgers add in perspective win totals to this team? 1.5. Is that fair? 2?
I don't have a number, a way to put a war on it the way that baseball does, but I would just frame it as Rudolph, if he were to start the full 17 game season or projected to be that way, he's going to continue the stagnation of Pittsburgh in the sense of they're going to be a 9-10 win team. They're going to be competitive, going to be in the hunt, maybe make the wild card game, maybe not. Rodgers, at his best, if it all comes together the way Pittsburgh envisions, is capable of winning a playoff game. Again, you got to have a good roster around him and get a little bit of luck to go your way and all that kind of stuff. But Rodgers is in that upper in above tier, I should say, above Rudolph to get this team to more plausibly win a playoff game and break that streak and that drought.
Should, and this is a big if they had to go the route of trading for a Kirk Cousins, how much does Kirk Cousins give you more than Mason Rudolph?
I don't think anything. That's a whole separate discussion, and we've talked about Cousins before, but if you're Pittsburgh, I don't know why you'd go after Kirk Cousins unless you can get him for incredibly cheap in the sense of Atlanta eating the vast majority of his contract. I think in that situation, I don't see the benefit. I think Pittsburgh would add another veteran just to have another veteran in that room that they like experience on the depth chart if something were to happen to Mason Rudolph or, whatever the case was, but I really don't see the allure of Kirk Cousins in any respect.
All right, but if you did go out and acquire any kind of big salary when it comes to a guy like Kirk Cousins, he's going to be your number one. But I don't think it at this point. I know we're sitting and waiting for the finality of all this and how long that will take. I still don't know. I really thought, rolling back in my head, we would know who the quarterback would be of this team at least a couple of days into free agency, and really thought that quarterback would be one of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And obviously it's not at this point. So I'm at a loss now as far as time frame of when this will get settled. But it all signs have been for a little while now that it really will be Aaron Rodgers. But it is a fair question: is have they put themselves in a precarious position that? And how much is this leverage on Aaron Rodgers' part? You guys need me, I need you. We need to come up on the money a little bit here. How much of this is posturing and negotiation along those lines? Because it does feel like that if it's not Aaron Rodgers, that you are settling for more than a rung or two down the ladder as far as it comes to being your quarterback
I know
for
you're just
2025.
I know you're just speculating and spitballing. I don't think it's a money issue, and Pittsburgh at least doesn't have the incentive to increase their offer, not bidding against any other team. There is no other team that we're aware of that is in the race. The Giants are out, the Vikings are out, at least for now and for the time being. And so Pittsburgh, other than to try to get the deal done and get finality at quarterback, does not have reason to increase their bid. I don't know the reason. I think Rodgers is taking his time because this is his first time and really probably only time as a free agent in his entire 20-year career. And this is likely his last NFL stop, playing one, maybe two more seasons. He wants to probably, introspective as he is, take all the time to evaluate that before making a really big decision.
Do you think he likes the limelight being on him, that almost every day of the NFL news cycle includes him to some degree?
I know that when it comes to playing football and especially quarterback, ego is a component. I think any good quarterback has had an ego of some sense of that they can get the job done, that they're the right guy for the job. But I think some of that is overstated in the media. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is looking at Pro Football Talk and listening to Twitter and that type of stuff for commentary on his situation. I think he's pretty off the grid in a lot of ways, and so I don't think that's a component of it.
All right, what else is there about Aaron Rodgers that we haven't discussed ad nauseum for the last 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks, however long this has gone on now?
Probably not much from Tomlin's commentary the last 2 days, but some interesting comments about quarterback at large. Says the team is evaluating options in the draft, not ruling out a first round quarterback either. Has talked about the team's doing due diligence, on the position. Did confirm he was at Texas last week with Quinn Ewers, and of course they were at Ohio State for Will Leonard, even Notre Dame for Riley Leonard, and bringing in Jackson Dart reportedly for a visit. And so they're certainly looking at quarterbacks in the draft, even with eyes towards Aaron Rodgers for the present.
How big a deal was it that Mike Tomlin was not at at least we think, not at the Ole Miss Pro Day?
It's a really good question. I'm kind of mixed on it because Dart coming in for a visit certainly says something about interest, and last week was just so busy it was hard to get to everywhere. But you'd also think the counterpoint to that would be, if you're going to consider a Jackson Dart in the first round, you probably want to watch that guy throw in person. And Pittsburgh does not do private workouts. At least they haven't historically. Have not seen any evidence that's changing under Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. And so Tomlin wouldn't see Dart throw in person. And that does kind of hint to me that that's not the direction they're going to go in round one.
Yeah, me as well. And then when you roll back to a couple years with that Kenny Pickett class and how they showed up at all those quarterback pro days and all, it would be out of the norm. At least when it comes to Jackson Dart, it would be a bit out of. Now maybe they're convinced too that, but even so, they went to the pro days of some quarterbacks they maybe thought would go ahead of Pickett, and even they were a bit surprised that Pickett fell to them where they did. But I mean, they did go to all those. They went to Cincinnati too, didn't they? Didn't they go to Cincinnati to see?
I will check.
What
It was Desmond Ridder. Was
Desmond
the
Ridder.
prospect.
We know they went to go see Malik Willis. Didn't they go to Ole Miss that year to see?
I don't believe they were at Ole Miss that year for Corral, but I will double check. He came in for a visit. It was very Jackson Dart-like in that
Okay.
respect. But I will read off the Tomlin Pro Days in 2022. Tomlin was at Georgia, Clemson, Michigan, Pitt, Liberty. I apologize. He was at Ole Miss. He was at Ole Miss. He was at Cincinnati
North
and
Carolina.
LSU.
Did he go to North Carolina?
Does not appear North Carolina that year. Let me check.
Okay.
Howell came in for a visit. Kevin Colbert, Matt Canada were at North Carolina that
All
year.
right. All right. Well, they've obviously, had more than just passing interest in the quarterback class this year, and it will be interesting to see. I know it's been reported that Jackson Dart is coming in. We'll wait for. I mean, we're still that list of pre-draft visitors, at least the 30. We only have built a little bit more than half out at this point, so this will probably be this. And when do visits end? It's the week before the draft, isn't it? Or is it 2 weeks before the draft where
It's
visits?
1 to 2 weeks before. They should pick up after owners' meetings. I imagine pro days are largely done. Teams are back at home, and so it'll pick up here soon.
It does look like maybe Omar Khan is talking
Is
today.
he?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll
Yeah,
see what
he's
he has
asked
to
about
say.
the ballooning pass rush market. TJ Watt enters an offseason where he's eligible for an extension. According to Brooke Pryor, I'm hopeful TJ will finish his career here. So he's not giving any specifics on when or if indeed that will happen, other than just saying that he hopes TJ Watt will finish his career here. So it sounds like we'll have some Omar Khan stuff to discuss maybe throughout the rest of this show, and definitely probably by the time the Wednesday show rolls around.
Should note for the Ole Miss Pro Day, assistant GM Andy Weidel was there, and so that was the fill-in for Tomlin and Omar Khan being absent. Also, wide receivers coach Zach Azzani was there for the couple, really trio of wide receivers Ole Miss has this year. Azzani's been a busy man on the Pro Day trail, Dave, and that generally correlates to the team drafting the position sooner than later.
Yeah, and if you go back over time, over the last, I don't know, 25 years, how many actual years have there been that this team has not actually drafted a wide receiver? Not many.
Right, don't have the exact number, but they generally do. But the question is not about would they draft one, but how early they would draft one. And Azzani making all these trips to Tennessee, to the Big 12 Pro Day, to Ole Miss, and then was at Pitt, even though that's very local, obviously, suggests they're taking one within their first 2 picks, I would say.
What, wide receiver?
Mhm.
I wouldn't necessarily pin it down to their first 2 picks, the first 3 rounds where it sits right now. We'll see if they get back into top 100 with another pick here as this thing goes on. But I would venture to say at least their first, by the end of round 4.
Well, if you look at the history between positional coaches and where they draft that position at in terms of the guys that are active on the trail, it's usually within the first 2 days. And so I know that the lack of picks this year makes it a little more narrow to think about that, but it's generally not something they save until the 4th, 5th round.
Yeah, but I need a little bit more convincing that it'll come within the first 2 picks, though. Still,
Well, the
I'm not saying that
convincing
it won't.
Yeah, no, I know, but the convincing is if you look at the positional coaches in past years who scoured the pro day trail. Last year it was Pat Meyer. I know Aaron Curry was at a pro day for Peyton Wilson, and I think another pro day too. I think maybe North Carolina for Cedric Gray. They drafted inside linebacker early. They had more picks last year, but I'm just the point is there's a really good correlation between positional coach activity that's strongest in drafting early within the first 2 days of the draft.
All right, fair enough. I'm really, really interested to see if this team ends up with 3 picks within the top 100 by the time it rolls around. I think it's going to happen, and if that does happen, then especially with this wide receiver class is okay. It's obviously not great, but yeah, I mean, if they were to go back, assuming they get a defensive lineman with that first pick, And if they were to pick up another pick within the top 100, I would even be that more convinced that one of those, either the second rounder or the third rounder, would be a wide receiver.
Rank the likelihood by method in which Pittsburgh would pick up an extra top 100 selection: by trading down, by trading up, or by trading a player.
It just feels like they would be more aggressive in going up, especially, maybe it cost you, I don't know, you got all these compensatories that are stacking up. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, you're stacking those compensatories for potentially a move up for a quarterback and all, but I think you got to play into here and now. And I would just, however it happens, I would think that getting another pick in the top 100 this year would come as a byproduct of them going up, just for the sheer fact that historically they don't move down in the first round very often.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, we shall see, and it certainly be.
I'd be on board with it. I mean, but here's the thing, though: if you're going to get that defensive lineman, and I still center this whole thing around, it's going to take a lot for me to get off. And I've said this many times. I just, from where I sit right now, I'll be very shocked if they don't get a defensive lineman with their first pick. But let's say the Michigan Kenny Clark and
Grant. Kenneth Grant
and Kenneth Grant and Oregon.
Derek Harmon.
Yeah, Derek Harmon. I don't have my list in front of me. Let's say both those guys go off the board, which I don't think is totally out of the question. But if that were to happen, would they really go with a Nolan there? Would they be more apt to then wait to some of these guys maybe in the second or third round? I just, would you be more apt? Then I guess what I'm saying is to trade down maybe a couple of spots if you have two or three guys outside of those two defensive linemen in Harmon and Kenneth to potentially go down. I think that's plausible only in that situation.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, for me, when it comes to D-line, I'm waiting on the visits. I'm waiting to see who comes in because they were not at those pro days. The most notable pro days they were at for top defensive linemen was Tyleik Williams, Ohio State, who's not generally viewed as a first rounder, and Alfred Collins from Texas, who I know has a foot injury. His foot was in a boot, did not work out of that pro day. Also not largely viewed as a candidate at 21. Don't want to discount it entirely. So I am all for defensive line in the first round. They should, in all likelihood, and they certainly could. But I am waiting on those guys to come in for visits to really confirm that.
I mean, you look at that next kind of wave that would potentially interest them past, say, Harmon and Kenneth Grant. Darius Alexander, Alfred Collins, maybe Tyleik Williams. But do those guys feel like slam dunk, guys that you would take at 21?
No, they don't. But this team has surprised us before in terms of guys they took in the first round. We didn't necessarily think were going to be first round candidates. So without a second round pick, there's also increased stress and strain on getting that defensive lineman secured, knowing that he may not be there by pick number 83.
Yeah, I'll maintain the fact that that if they were to trade down in the first round and pick up another pick within the top 100, it would probably be a result of both Derek Harmon and Kenneth Grant coming off the board before they pick at 21.
Fair enough. Let's go back to quarterback briefly. Mike Tomlin talked about, and I was really curious on this, not that it's going to matter much ultimately, but just from the framing aspect of this is a Steelers team that publicly said we want to bring back Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, want to build on 2024. Obviously, that does not happen. Fields goes to the Jets. The team seemingly has no interest in Russ. He goes to the Giants. They're starting their quarterback room all over again for the second straight year. I really wanted to see how the team would respond to that. And Mike Tomlin said it just didn't pan out. Didn't give a whole lot of commentary, both on Sunday and then asked again on Monday. Said that's free agency, and really, he kind of framed it in the sense of neither guy really wanted to return, just saying that's free agency. That's the process of how it goes. And that was kind of his angle and spin on the situation.
Yeah, I mean, what's he going to say? Neither one of those two guys. He's going to come out and say neither one of those two guys wanted to be back.
No, I understand, but it's just interesting to see this team again talk about its public comments and their actions be completely misaligned.
What did you think about this morning? Him being asked about what was the answer he gave about turning over the quarterback room again, and something along the lines of if it happens again next year. I don't have that. I'm trying to find.
Yeah, it was something to the effect of two is a trend, but he's not alarmed by this team going back to back years of total upheaval at quarterback. He says if it happens a third time in 2026, then it's a discussion. So he's downplaying the big time turnover.
Okay, and obviously they have Mason Rudolph under contract for 2026 as we sit here right now. So at least they won't. They're at least as they sit right now, they're not with a completely empty draft room past this year.
Right. It just seems like a cop out to me from Tomlin to say, yeah, next year, because he also probably knows that with Rudolph under contract, they probably won't be turning over the entire quarterback room next season. To do it back to back years is rare for any team, I would imagine, and especially for Pittsburgh. And it doesn't really suggest, being able to build and to sustain and to have be able to carry over, one year to the next and have some stability and consistency at quarterback, which is so important. And it makes Pittsburgh feel like a grab bag of just trying out different options each year and then running to the next. And so to me, Tomlin's trying to brush the issue aside, but I think there's certainly a critique for a team that feels unsteady and uncertain of even what they want to do at quarterback.
All right, and the national media still, as a whole, primarily views this as the Steelers should be frustrated with themselves with how all this is played out with the waiting game with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, no, I get that. Even a comment I'm seeing from Omar Khan right now. I'm just reading a partial tweet here from Dale Lawley. I don't know the exact question, but it was about the team's long-term plan at quarterback. He says, Khan does, quote, "It's not easy. It's not ideal. We addressed it last year. We're addressing it this year. At some point, there has to be a long-term solution. I'll say that might happen this year. It could happen next year." End quote from Omar Khan.
Do you really do you believe that they really thought they were going to get Justin Fields back, and then now they're having to, and that they didn't want Russell Wilson back, or Russell Wilson was maybe plan C or D in all this, uh, and that they were a little bit floored that they didn't get um, Justin Fields back, and then now this is the byproduct of it, just waiting for Aaron Rodgers.
It seems a reasonable summation. They were hopeful to get Fields back, didn't really want Russ back, and they were putting their hopes into Fields. I mean, I'm sure they're smart enough to realize when you go into a season with every single quarterback on an expiring contract, as they did in 2024, there are no guarantees. You can't rubber stamp anything. I just feel like Pittsburgh doesn't exactly know what they want in their quarterback situation. Who is their long term guy? Who do they want to hitch their wagon to? They're hesitant or unsure. They're trying different pieces. They're giving lower contracts out to Fields for some risk mitigation, perhaps. And I just don't think Pittsburgh really knows exactly who they want and how to go about that.
All right.
But the draft, as I've always said, is going to be the real solution. Even if they re-sign Justin Fields, he was not necessarily their long-term option, their franchise's future. He was going to be someone to continue to watch and development on a and develop on a reasonable quarterback contract, and still have an eye towards the draft, where I ultimately believe Pittsburgh will be exploring this year or next year or potentially both years.
All right, exactly. And I think Omar Khan said the plan is to have 4 quarterbacks in the room going to training camp, and obviously right now they just have the 2 in Rudolph and Skylar Thompson.
Yeah, they always have four. The question is more interesting how they acquire the other two. Rodgers seemingly one, and then the question will be, will the fourth one be an undrafted free agent or a higher draft pick?
Right.
What else from Mike Tomlin, Dave, stuck out to you in his meetings with the media?
Really, and quite obviously excited to have a guy like DK Metcalf. Talked about DK Metcalf, short game, long game, almost like he's a golfer. Short game, long game, contested catch ability. He's not concerned about having two alpha males in there wanting the football in DK Metcalf and George Pickens. In so many words, says that's a good problem to have, and I agree with him when it comes to that. Said he did not really have conversations right up front with George Pickens about the acquisition of DK Metcalf. What else is there about DK Metcalf? Talked about how impressed he was way back when DK Metcalf ran Buddha down on that interception, and that was quite an impressive play. But just how he's overly excited about how it came together uh, rather quickly, and that DK Metcalf wanting to be part of the Steelers helped play a part in that. Sounds like DK Metcalf did all of his homework on the Steelers ahead of that. Kind of had an inclination that he wanted to go to the Steelers. I know there's another report out there that the Patriots wanted to trade for him, but DK Metcalf really didn't want to go that route. Just the overall excitement that you would expect out of Tomlin to have a player and the resume such as DK Metcalf coming into the building now.
Sure, all that makes sense, all that reasonable, and I agree with all that Tomlin had to say there. I thought his comment about, potential redundancy with Metcalf and Pickens having on paper similar skill sets, downfield, vertical, outside receiver types, and is there a concern about repetition in this offense? And Tomlin really pushed back on that and said they're not really the same guy. That George is tall, but he's not big the way that Metcalf is, and Metcalf a much more explosive receiver. That's my editorial, not Tomlin's comment. But I noted that in my film room breakdown the day after the Metcalf trade that they win in different ways vertically. Pickens is more the acrobatic, catch around you kind of guy, and sometimes go up and get a type of guy, the real combat catch situations. That's how he wins vertically. Metcalf is the run by you kind of a guy, the real track star that can just burn you with speed, stack you, and then box you out at the catch point. And so while they're both vertical receivers, I think Metcalf is more explosive, more dynamic, and the way that in which they win vertically is actually pretty different.
Yeah, even though Metcalf has made his share of combative catches, I think 1-for-1, George Pickens might be the better combative catcher 1-for-1, but that might not be Metcalf's fault because so many times he is stacking those guys on the outside, right? And when he does win in the short area, such a big guy, such a big target, such a physical player that a lot of times it's hard to combat catch a guy that big, especially in the short. I'll tell you what, we better see a lot more damn slants and quick game out of the Steelers more towards the middle of the field than we ever have in the last even, I don't know, 4 seasons or whatnot because of what these two the skill set. I'm not in a bit concerned about how similar or unsimilar the type of game these two guys have. The fact of the matter is these two guys can beat you in various ways, and because of that, you just can't key on one guy. And as we've talked about, this should limit the amount of one safety deep looks. Should hopefully two deep situations, which you would hope you'd be able to take advantage of, not only maybe in the short passing game, but the running game quite obviously there. So yeah, they might share some similar attributes as far as what they bring in totality, but the fact that those two are so well rounded overall, it's a good problem to have for this team.
Agreed. More is more. To me, it's not less is more when it comes to big playability and talented receivers and vertical threats that defenses have to contend with. And so I'm happy with adding as many of those playmakers as possible. All right, what else, Dave? I thought interesting commentary about some of the young guys, and this is classic Tomlin, not critiquing it, but it is very a Tomlin thing to do, challenging these young guys, making sure no one's getting too comfortable in their roles. And I mean that whenever he talked about was asked, is your starting front five on the offensive line set in stone? Is that going to be your guys? And Tomlin said, I don't know. I would be untrue to say that our starting offensive line is written in the ink, and that's probably a message towards young guys like a Broderick Jones, even a Troy Fautanu, who the team is high on, but just making sure no one feels too comfortable about their status. The same for cornerback Beanie Bishop, talking about Bishop will have to recapture his role in 2025. There'll be competition in the slot. Obviously, Bishop really replaced by Cam Sutton down the stretch. That did not work out well for anybody, but kind of sending that message to Beanie of your job is not locked up to be this team's starting slot corner in 2025.
As far as the offensive line comments go, are you telling me that we are to believe that Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier and Isaac Seumalo are not are scrambling to prove they? I understand the overall message that he's trying to send here, but let's face it, if this message is for anybody right now, it's probably more for a Mason McCormick, I think, because I mean, you got 2 first-round draft picks in, or two former first-round draft picks in Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu. Those guys are going to be in that Week 1 starting lineup, barring injury or doing something just unthinkable. Isaac Seumalo, all but penciled in to be your starting left guard. Zach Frazier is going to be your starting center. And that really only leaves one other position along that line, and that's the right guard spot in Mason McCormick, who had a bit, I think in totality, Mason McCormick had a good rookie season. It did seem to kind of wane as the season went on. There are areas of his game that need to be improved. So I think this was just the lip service of, hey, these guys got something to prove this year as a collective, and more than anything, I just view this as a more of an indirect question mark about Mason McCormick.
See, I think it's for the entire group. I think it's even if I had to pick one name, Broderick Jones, for a guy that needs that fire lit under him. But I think regardless of
Well,
parsing
that's
out,
that's that's fine to say, but who's behind him right now?
well, sure,
Give me a reason to think that there's a reason to go other than him.
no, that's what I was about to say. That regardless of parsing out who that message is intended for, the actions are going to speak louder in terms of even in interior offensive line. Like who is the big competition right now? Spencer Anderson lost out to McCormick last year. They tried Anderson at first to replace Sayamalu. It didn't go well, and they put in McCormick instead, and was the guy once Sayamalu came back after the first month. I mean, there really isn't a lot of competition overall, and that's probably been a fair critique of this team as they've tried to rebuild this offensive line the last 4 or 5 seasons, not having enough vets there, not having enough competition, letting these young guys just kind of walk in and hand them the jobs and hope it works out. So, I think the real focus here for Pittsburgh, regardless of what Tomlin says, is adding some veteran competition to really push these guys.
Well, here's the thing. That unit's got to be better. They've got to grow into their own as a unit up front. How this offensive line, outside of the quarterback, obviously, position being important, how this offensive line unit takes that next step is imperative to offensive success. And I mean, you obviously could say that around the entire league and any offense overall, but you have seen offenses around the league be able to patchwork a lot better than the Steelers have been able to patchwork on offensive line due to injuries and go with later round, non-pedigree guys. It just seems like in totality than the Steelers have been able to do these last several years.
Yeah, I mean, I just think Pittsburgh had really strong O-line depth last year, and that was important to get through the season, especially the first, pre-bye week when they had so many different offensive line combinations. And I'm not seeing that same depth and flexibility right now. Now things can change during the draft, post-draft, at roster cutdowns. There's still time, but something to watch for sure.
The comments about Beanie Bishop are a lot more in line because you definitely have a younger player there that had his ups and downs, and a guy at such a key position here on a defensive side of football. You go out and you add, Nichols, and obviously you add to that quarterback room with an outside guy with veteran experience in Slay. Beanie Bishop should not be comfortable at all that he's going to walk in there week 1 and be the starter in sub package.
Agreed. Who do you see as primary competition? You mentioned Brandon Eccles, Bishop himself. Who else is in that slot mix?
There's not much in that room overall right now, so it'll be interesting to see maybe what they do in the draft when it comes to that.
How much would you give consideration to drafting a slot corner relatively sooner than later?
Man, you only have so many early picks right now, so you can only go. We just talked about wide receiver, talked about defensive line. Are they going to take a quarterback within those first 4 rounds? Are they going to take a running back? You start running out of picks there. I would like to think that maybe at some point during the draft, a cornerback is added via one of the selections. I'm just not convinced right now it would be within the first, let's say, 4 rounds.
Is a primary outside corner or a primary slot corner of bigger need for Pittsburgh?
Well, you parlay that into some of the things he's talked about adding another safety in Thornhill and how the hell it gives them the ability to have three safety packages to help combat some of these tight ends. Uh,
Yeah, but that's big nickel stuff against 12 personnel. I'm talking 11 personnel, your 2-4-5 nickel.
well, I mean, I think that you obviously, I mean, how much can you count on a guy like Corey Trice to come in and give you maybe some potential slot snaps? You just don't have a lot to know about him, and the big question with him is, can you even count on him being healthy and all?
Mhm.
You do have a versatile guy in Eccles that can play inside and outside, although I do believe that the intention on them would be battling for more the nickel job there. I think it's down to those two and whatever flavor they decide that best fits maybe what they can do in the draft. In other words, I think the door is open for if they do draft a cornerback to be either a guy that is predominantly outside or a guy that predominantly projects as an inside guy. I just think it depends on how the draft falls to them. Now, I do think that there will be, an undrafted free agent or two that come in. I mean, look, Beanie was undrafted. A lot of people thought maybe he was going to be drafted
Mhm.
last year, and really even after the draft, kind of a bit surprised that because of all kind of what Beanie did coming out of college, that the Steelers were the team that with no guarantee with no guarantees beyond the signing bonus. How was it that Pittsburgh was the team that fortunately landed him? It was a bit surprise to me. But I could they go that route again? Do they have to draft a cornerback this year after all the moves that they've made in free agency? I think the answer is no. But
Mhm.
I do think that I don't think we can pigeonhole this team if they were to draft a corner to it be, oh, it's definitely going to be a slot guy or it's definitely going to be an outside guy.
Yeah, I don't wanna say it's pigeonhole, but I'm just looking at if you had to pick or if you had a greater just in your estimation of what is the bigger need. Not saying you're married to that in the draft and how the board breaks and what's available to you. Maybe you find somebody who can play inside and outside. That's certainly possible, but just talking looking at the roster construction, what is the bigger area of need? Is it slot corner or is it outside corner?
Well, I mean, you got 1 year out of Darius Slay. It's hard to think that you're going to expect more than that. Eccles is was that a was that a 1 year deal with him?
It's a
Forgive me,
two-year deal.
2 year deal. I mean, even so, I mean, you're hoping to get at least one quality year and then see where it goes from there. You obviously got a lot of questions about Trice right now. Uh, I mean, you've got questions about long term right now about both inside and outside,
Mhm.
outside of Joey Porter. So I mean that's why again I think that it's very open as far as which way if they were to draft a position that could go because you don't have a guy that you can pencil other than Joey Porter Jr. You don't have. Can you sit here and say, well, this guy's going to be the corner opposite Joey Porter Jr. in 2026, or this guy's going to be the slot past 2025?
I agree, but isn't it frustrating? And I mentioned it so many times. I do sound like a broken record, but for this team to go into every single training camp basically having no idea, no clear picture of who their slot corner is going to be, and that happened last year too when they took, Cam Sutton was suspended, and they knew that was going to happen for the first 8 games. You had an unknown in Beanie Bishop, undrafted guy. You had Braylon Arnold, Josiah Scott. it's probably going to be a bit stronger this year with Bishop in his second year, Eccles, a veteran, whoever else they add, draft pick, undrafted free agent, something like that. So I think it'll be a better situation in the slot this year than past years, but it still feels a little muddy and murky, especially for a long-term answer.
Okay.
Isn't
I, I mean,
I'm frustrated by this team's for a team that saw the value of Mike Hilton for years and developed him, made him a really good player, to then really kind of ignore that since is frustrating.
well, I mean, they're obviously what slot or the cornerback room in particular. Is that what you're meaning, or?
No, slot corner. They
Oh,
have this rotating cast of characters at slot every year. They're never quite sure what they're gonna do. They've had to just kind of piece it together. They've yet to find that full-time, long-term option.
well, when you miss in certain other areas of the draft, like they missed in, and I mean, you got Corey Trice late. There's only so much mud you can throw up on the wall every year
Yeah, but it's about what
with
you
draft
prioritize.
picks.
It's what you prioritize. It's not even draft picks. You can go sign somebody too. You can go trade for somebody. I mean, there's other options in roster building that just beyond the draft. And so, for a team to recognize the value of a slot corner, what he offers as a blitzer, as a run defender, obviously in coverage, when they were in sub packages more this year than they have been the last decade, and their base numbers were way down this year. And so, to not obviously they had Bishop and he made some plays, but just overall, just a construction of let's go into training camp last year with an undrafted rookie free agent, a suspended Cam Sutton who was declining anyway, journeyman in Graylin Arnold, Josiah Scott. It's just like, what is your plan here? Why can you not make an investment in the position that is so important to your defense? Really a starter on your defense.
Well, I mean, you hope much like the quarterback room, you don't have this as a continuing thing for yet another year. I mean, you would like a guy like Beanie Bishop, per se, to step up this year and say, okay, well that's our corner for at least the next couple of years, right? Slot corner.
Yeah, I'd hope so. I don't know if he has some of the characteristics that are ideal. How good is his run defense? How good is he as a blitzer? Even in coverage, we'll see. Potentially some strength there. Obviously, made some plays with the 4 interceptions, but communication was an issue last year. Hopefully, that will improve in his second season. But there's still some questions, I think, certainly on Beanie Bishop.
Okay, yeah, and there should be.
Right, right. So Tomlin challenging him and having Eccles, and we'll see who else gets added to that mix and go from there. All right, Dave, what else from Mike Tomlin caught your attention?
Daniel Quale comments about interior guy and run down defender, and how he's hoping he fits in with the team on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, that says it well. We talked about him as somebody that was solid and stout against the run, talked about him as a potential base defensive end if you needed him to, and can be really good rotational depth if you can get a rookie in there that's playing good snaps right away. So the ceiling's not going to be high, but hopefully he's a pretty high floor guy that'll, again, play good run defense for a team that needs better run defense.
All right.
And then on Eccles and also Malik Harrison talked about what they can offer on defense, but also special teams, and that was kind of a comment, especially for Malik Harrison, defensive guy, special teams guy, and so somebody who can wear more hats than just do one thing for you as a team.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, I thought it was interesting. He at some point, one of these couple interviews, talked about Eccles, about special teams ability and things we already highlighted. I think he talked about Malik Harrison as well too, and some of the things that they've obviously seen firsthand with him being at Baltimore, and what all he adds to the room, and the position flexibility. He was asked again, he was outside linebacker, inside linebacker. Mike Tomlin wouldn't completely tip his hand there, other than to say that he has the versatility to do both those things.
And I think especially for Harrison, that's important because if Peyton Wilson progresses and really takes on an base and nickel down role in 2025, which is ideal. He would love for that to happen. Then where does that leave that third inside backer? And for Harrison, at the least, he can still be that 4-5 face special teamer that gives him value on Sundays beyond just being a backup.
And that's a guy that we talked about, obviously can help you on special teams. What else did Mike tell? Oh, Cole Holcomb, he expects him to be good to go for the start of training camp, which feels like kind of an obvious, being as how they have since talked about how they thought he could contribute to this team had the team gone further into playoffs last year.
And also Cameron Johnston, the punter, says he'll be good for training camp. I wanted to hear about more OTAs than training camp, because you kind of assume those guys will be good for training camp. Holcomb, especially since he was practicing last year, will they be fully cleared for the spring? But it is good to know, at least by training camp, those guys will both be ready to go, and it'll be a good battle between Corliss Waitman and Cameron Johnston.
He was asked Monday morning about one of the biggest things about Roman Wilson missing a lot of time as a rookie with his injury. Mike Tomlin said the developmental component, first and foremost. There's no shortcut to skill development, particularly at the wide receiver position, and that comes with reps and repetition. And so, where's the rest of it here? And so it's a cost when you miss those. In no way, shape, or form should it be taken that this team's given up on Roman Wilson. You've got and the addition of DK Metcalf. Let's roll back to us talking about how early this team might take a wide receiver in this draft. This is more about moving past potentially losing George Pickens after this season.
Yeah, I think if anything, he was optimistic about the rookies that were injured last year in Fautanu and Roman Wilson. Said he expects significant growth and is not going to lower the bar on those guys despite not playing. These are guys that took mental reps, that have been around the NFL for an entire season. They know expectations, know what a season is like, at least watching it, even if they have not really played in it. And I really liked the comparisons he made as examples of guys that have turned around their careers with similar starts. He talked about Calvin Austin missing his rookie season with that was a foot injury, I
But
think he had. Yeah. And obviously played an impact role in Pittsburgh in 2024 and hopefully for 2025. And David Castro, who had the same injury Fautanu had his rookie year, first round pick, dislocated his kneecap. DeCastro did come back to play the final month of his rookie year, but point is he got healthy, didn't stop him from having a fantastic career and probably future Hall of Honor guy for Pittsburgh. So I do like being able to lean on those stories to those young guys. Hey, look at this guy, Roman, this teammate of yours, Calvin Austin. He was in your situation a couple years back. He turned it around. And for Fautanu, go watch some highlights of David DeCastro and realize he has a very similar story to you. Those are always, I think, good framing for young guys to think about.
all right, we hit on the Juan Thornhill. He says, we're going to certainly mix that up with him in today's game. You need 3 safety structured defense for multiple tight end sets and situational play. All of those guys are really versatile. We're very familiar with Juan and his talents because we've competed against him. And so that's going to be a fun endeavor to figure out how to divide the labor up. And that certainly will change from time to time. We expect those guys to be interchangeable pieces and really provide a challenge for the offenses that we compete against.
Yeah, again, some of the big nickel stuff. I think primarily the 12 personnel, the Baltimores of the world, the teams that have those athletic tight ends. Can you run 3 safety sets to combat that? Is something Pittsburgh has been doing the last couple of years. Obviously, potential dime roll maybe for Thornhill as well. Although I think Trice will get first crack at it. Thornhill just has to play better. I mean, obviously, had 2 rough years in Cleveland, got to stay healthy. He had 11 games played in each of his 2 seasons with the Browns. I think he had recurring calf injuries, I think it was the big bugaboo there. And so that's going to be key for him. So 1-year flyer, it is some veteran safety depth, which Pittsburgh desperately needed. They had nothing behind Minkah Fitzpatrick or Deshaun Elliott, but I'm a little less optimistic on Thornhill than Tomlin is sounding.
Yeah, I got to see him get back to making some of those plays again.
Right, that he made at Kansas City and helped win a couple of Super Bowls there. Let's see what else. Tomlin excited about the Ireland game. I know it's kind of more of a soft news story footer, but knows how much it means to Pittsburgh and to the late Dan Rooney, Ambassador Rooney. And so Tomlin seemed to be excited for this team's first international game in over a decade.
Obviously, the competition committee with Mike Tomlin being on, he's going to be busy this week here. He thinks division winners should get a home playoff game. He says, I'm a division purist. I love the rivalries that that is divisional play. I love the structure of our scheduling that highlights it. I think the division winners should get a home playoff game.
And that was in response to the Lions rule proposal that would rank the playoff teams just by, I think, pure record, right? It would not be about divisional based and wild card in that sense. It would just be the best teams get ranked by record. So this will help, I think, solve the issue of what last year with Detroit and Minnesota having great records and only, one of them became a wild card team. And so that would also potentially prevent, an 8-win team that has happened from time to time in divisional play getting a home playoff game in a top 4 seed. And so that's the Lions' belief, but Tomlin does not agree with that and wants to keep the model as is. What are your thoughts, Dave? Are you pro this Lions change, or do you want to keep it status quo?
You should not be penalized because you're in a tough division, and you should not be rewarded because maybe you are in a weaker conference or a division and all like that. I'm with Tomlin on this. If you win the division, that should get you something out of this. Obviously, if you're the number 1 seed overall, you get a perk that comes along with that. If you win your own division, absolutely you should get a perk, and that should be a home playoff game. Here, here.
I agree, but I think the counter would be okay. So who was who didn't win it was the Vikings that did not win the NFC North last year, right? They became a wild card team, but they won 14 games. Why would they be a wild card team compared to a divisional team hypothetically that goes, 9-8 or only wins 8 games in some sort of funky fashion like that? Why does that team get a better placement than the 14-win team?
They won the division.
Fair, fair. But I think the counter to that would be they weren't as deserving. They won the division, but they didn't have as good a record, and so rank it off a record because it's what other sports. Well, I guess some sports. The NBA just goes off a conference. It's not divisional play, just based off the conference. That kind of be the model. I think the Lions are angling towards. I know baseball and hockey. I'm not even sure on hockey standings and how they see things, but yeah, I mean, I think overall is I'm with you. I'm with Tomlin. I want to keep it as is. I do
Right.
like the importance of divisional play and making sure those rivalries within the division remain super relevant.
All right, the whole tush push thing. Mike Tomlin said something to the degree of there's not enough plays really to look at from a safety component, but they are going to look at all that. Uh, does it feel like this thing's going to pass?
I am probably trending towards them. Okay, here's the thing. Are they going to say no tush push allowed? I think what they'll do is you really can't just ban a play name. You'd have to ban the actual action of the play. So it'd be something like it is illegal to stand behind a runner and push him
Right.
forward, something like that. So that's kind of, I think, what's more on the table than ban tush push specifically or not. It sounds like there's enough.
So you gotta if you ban that when you're downfield and the running back's trying to get extra yards and the offensive lineman comes from behind and tries to uh Chris Kimawatu them and get an extra 3 yards, that should be disallowed as well, right?
Well,
Or,
I
or
think they'll word it in a way to make sure they protect those types of more organic downfield moments where it may be based off a pre-snap alignment. You can't align it because they tweaked the tush push last year. I forget exactly what they did. They made some minor modifications based on where you can stand. I think you had to be further back in 2024. So there was some change there. It sounds like it's a pretty heated debate, and you need is it 24 teams to pass it? So it's going to be, I think, a pretty close call, but there certainly seems to be a groundswell to do it. My concern is, this is partially being done, at least publicly, under the guise of player safety, but there's no evidence that it's a player safety issue. It's theoretical. They talked about there were no injuries on tush push last year, and Tomlin talked about the smaller sample size. But my whole thing would be until you get data that says there is a player safety concern and that's shown on the field, then you really can't tout player safety as an issue. So I think it's really being done because teams can't stop it and teams are mad about it, especially NFC teams facing the Eagles, and they're trying to get rid of it under the cover of it's a player safety concern.
Right. I think the byproduct of all this is we need more time to study the impact of it from a injury player safety standpoint. I'm not expecting just from what I've seen out there, the way it's been presented and all, I'm not expecting the league to ban any element of it, really.
Okay, I'm not really certain which way it's going to go, but I think it's more likely than probably where you're at right now. But I think teams are just pretending it's a player safety issue, but if in an honest moment they just don't want to deal with the tush push because they can't stop the Eagles from converting.
Right. If you figure out how to stop it, or don't
Yeah.
get yourself in third and short, fourth and short, or second and short, whatever situations, so you don't have to deal with it. That's the best way around it.
Tomlin also admitted an 18-game season seems inevitable, which it really does. It's really a question of when, not a question of if. There'll be some, I think, buzz about it this spring. I don't know if it's going to get implemented in time for 2025. Would seem kind of unlikely with the schedule needing to come out in less than 2 months. But that's where it's going to go. There was interesting debate on Twitter between two Steelers today, Patrick Queen and Braden Fajoko, discussing and debating about the NFL expanding its season. And Fajoko had a proposal, I think, of a 20-game season and laid out what that would look like. And Patrick Queen said, "You crazy to ask for that and expect players to be able to handle that for an entire year." So that's more extreme. That's a 20-game season. I think that was a 20-game regular season is what he was proposing, I believe. But Queen pushing back on the basic idea of expanding the season.
Yeah, and I think most people, most players at their core are against this, but this is obviously going to be a CBA thing that they have to work through, especially with the CBA not up for a few more years here. There's going to have to be some give, obviously, on the owner's part, and we all know how that goes. So I'm not expecting this, obviously, to happen this year, but I'm with Tomlin at some point. It's going to happen. There's no way around it.
Right, sooner rather than later. And yet, Bocos tweeted out, scratch all 3 preseason games, go to 20 regular season games, 2 mandatory bye weeks, go from 53 to a 60-man active roster, scratch OTAs and mandatory minicamp, have players report mid-July, do a 2-3 week ramp up, August training camp, joint practices, September kickoff. I think the NFL would ideally want that, but there's going to have to be and they're not going to 20 anytime soon, but that's probably ideally what the NFL would want.
I tell you, the hardest thing I have with all this, even though this is going to come to fruition with with at least the 18 game season, is losing these preseason games. I know it doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, and I know to most veterans and all, it doesn't mean a lot. Heck, I know there's no way to maybe to make it voluntary in nature and all, but I mean, that's an opportunity for us to look at deeper guys on the roster. It's more selfish, I think, on our end, but I mean, it could be selfish on the young players, on the undrafted guys as well too. So if you're not having, is this just going to lead to more scrimmages in practices that we're not going to get the all 22 film on? Is this just going to revolve mostly around decisions about practice? Will it prevent these undrafted guys from more undrafted guys from making a roster? I once again, I view this as more selfish on my part.
I mean, I it is for us, but it's also for the players because we want to give those underdogs a chance. And there are so many success stories of guys that were overlooked, and not everyone's a first round pick. In fact, most people aren't first round picks, obviously. And you rob them of those opportunities. And yes, they would substitute with joint practices, but get a lot of fights in joint practices. For whatever reason, tempers flare, guys throw hands. It's actually kind of that's almost a player safety issue in itself and a bad look for the NFL. And also just a practice with coaches standing right next to you without a crowd in the way an NFL stadium presents it. It just preseason action is different than a practice with another team. It's just a different environment, and it's a better way to evaluate whenever players are out there on the field without a coach, 5 feet of them from them with a card reading the play. So I just don't like it, but I know we're both fighting an uphill battle on that one, Dave.
Yeah, we're selfish here. If it's up to me, they'd have 4 or 5 preseason games.
Me too.
Even if none of the veterans, guaranteed starters, played in it.
You could honestly, you could set something up like that maybe, but that's maybe a different discussion for a different day. All right, anything else from Mike Tomlin? Anything else big and notable here from him? I'm just kind of scrolling through all in which we've written. I'm not sure if Omar Khan has had anything else to say that was super relevant in the last couple minutes.
What has Omar Khan said? Obviously asked about TJ Watt, hoping to get an extension done there. Not ideal to remake the quarterback room 2 consecutive years. I'm not seeing anything else aside. Of course, I ain't been following it tweet for tweet here so far. So yeah, it'll leave us something to talk about more on Wednesday, perhaps, when it comes to Omar Khan.
Yeah, with Tomlin, just looking back, Tomlin mentioned that kind of the real line in the sand for quarterback clarity is training camp, is what Tomlin said. He said the spring is for teaching and learning, kind of downplayed almost, an Aaron Rodgers scenario in which he wasn't at training camp. He didn't address that specifically, but that was kind of the way that I'm interpreting and framing things. But to me, yes, the spring is for teaching and learning, and a quarterback has to be part of that process in terms of being there to be part of the teaching and learning portion of off-season development.
All right. Okay.
Also mentioned on Darius Slay and Kenneth Gainwell, why those guys were brought in. Slay, the veteran presence, all the respect that Tomlin has for Slay throughout his career. And then Gainwell really cited Tomlin did that Eagles game last year in which Gainwell had 3 catches for 40 yards, all resulting in first downs and some of the great plays in space that Gainwell made. Also confirmed Gainwell will be in the mix on kick returns.
And also mention some of the other special team aspect of Gainwell too, right?
What else besides kick returns?
Didn't he
mention
play?
that?
Didn't he play some on special teams?
I think he did do some kick coverage. I just don't. I mean, I may have missed Tomlin saying that. I just don't remember the comment that Tomlin made about that. But yes, Gainwell.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
Gainwell does offer special teams value across the board.
Right.
He's a coverage guy in some respect on kick coverage and then on kick returns as well.
All right. What else is out there for us to talk about on this Monday outside of Tomlin and Khan?
That was all really the big stuff. It was pretty quiet news weekend until all that picked up Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. Trying to think of anything else big came out.
What about pro day sightings?
Yeah, I'll go back and check our tracker here for Friday. Mentioned Andy Weidel being at Ole Miss, along with Zach Azzani. Pro days are really ramping up. Sacramento State is today. They got a lineman there that probably will get drafted. You got some showcases later this week, and I think the Colorado showcase will be the big one. We'll see if Pittsburgh sends anyone there. Let me just go through who all was at kind of our last batch of pro days last week. Dan Colbert was at Penn State. Couldn't find anyone else who was there. That's the most notable name from the last Friday's workout stage.
All right, and we'll
also,
see.
I should mention Ike Taylor worked out the Ole Miss DBs on Friday, so it was Weidel, Azzani, and Taylor, a pretty heavy hitter lineup for pro day.
And let's see I would think that if we get, you think there will be any pre-draft visitors with today with them in Florida? Probably won't ramp back up until Wednesday, probably, right?
Isn't that the last day of owners meetings? So maybe Thursday, Friday, and then next week I imagine it'll really ramp up.
All right, so hopefully we'll be able to build that list out a little bit more. All right, I think that's all we got.
Let's get to a couple read emails and close out today's show. No live stream tonight, part of our normal schedule. There'll be one hopefully next week. There's a chance we'll have to rearrange schedules next Monday, but we'll deal with that when the time comes.
All right, got an email from Craig Sampson here. I agree with Dave. It feels like I am in la-la land with this A-Rod situation. It feels like a weird dream that we are in this position. At this point, the Steelers have to take their losses and not necessarily tank, but save up as many picks for next year as possible in order to trade up. Because of this, I say trade down to the second round for a defensive lineman and running back, maybe a wide receiver, and at the very least with 1 second round draft pick for next year, and get the heck out of the draft. no developmental quarterback because guess what? We cannot develop players. They need to come to us more or less developed. He says another point, well, I like getting DK Metcalf on our team. It does seem odd that we target him specifically, a good but non-elite player, he says. Don't get me wrong. He is good, but is he a game changer? Why do you think that he was our target? What do you guys consider his biggest strength and weakness? I was almost certain that if we got DK, that would definitely keep Russ because they have played together and are friends. Lastly, I think that cornerback is the toughest position to play, both physically and mentally. Every play you run routes at 100% speed and strength, knowing that you will get beat at some time. And you don't get as much praise as a wide receiver running the same routes and catching the ball. He says, what do you guys think is the toughest position, both physically and mentally, to play? That's probably a really good question. Look, it's more opinion on his part saying they should trade down into the second round. I guess he's meaning trade out of the first round. Good luck with that. I mean, I understand the theory behind it. As I stated, I think more apt if you are to see them trade down in the first round, it would just be a couple of picks down. It would probably be a result of them maybe not getting the 2 defensive linemen maybe they have on their board there, but even the probability of that's probably low, being as how this team just, and every year's different. You just can't say, well, I mean, you can and you can't say it's been since Casey Hampton that this team traded down in the first round. Every year's a new year and all, but I would be a bit surprised if they traded down in the first round overall. Let's see he's not wanting them to really take a developmental quarterback because he views them as a team that can't develop players. As far as DK, look, the addition of DK, I think, is a sum of the all the parts type thing. You need this team needs a weapon that can help complement DK Metcalf. They needed that same weapon last year. They didn't. They took a stab at it with Mike Williams, and obviously there was the rumblings of them, Christian Kirk, and the fact of the matter is that wide receiver room was one good player short at a minimum last year, and I'm okay with you saying that DK Metcalf maybe is not the elite of the elite, but he is a game changer now. I think this is a guy that can make game changing plays for you. So I would push back, and he says the question about is he a game changer? Why do I think he was specifically the target? I mean, there's only probably so many guys out there that were targetable via trade. And I think he definitely was one of them, and just what he brings and the skill set that he brings made him a target. And, his biggest strength and weaknesses. What would DK Metcalf's weaknesses be? I mean, we know a lot about his strengths, but what would DK Metcalf's weaknesses be?
I'd have to read up on my film room that I wrote last month on that, or earlier this month, to refresh my memory. I mean, he's not elite in some of the short routes. Obviously, not going to be the most nuanced route runner in the world. There is a higher number of offensive penalties he's recorded compared to other receivers. I think him and Pickens are among the most offensively penalized receivers in football. Talked about, I don't know if he's truly that above the rim combat catcher the way that even a George Pickens is. I think he doesn't always play to that size downfield, but he runs by people. He stacks corners more so than a George Pickens. So those are kind of the primary things I look at. Not going to be the most super nuanced route runner, offensive penalties, and maybe not being that jump ball machine that you think he would be looking at him getting off the bus.
What is the toughest position, both physically and mentally, to play?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, quarterback, the mental aspect is number one by far. It's not, I would say, the most physically demanding position. I think corner is a good acknowledgement. I think the mental side does not get talked about enough for the reason the reader stated of like every corner is going to get beat, every corner is going to be on the wrong side of a highlight reel from time to time. It comes with the territory. You got to be headstrong to put that past you and still believe you're the best in the world, even after giving up a big play in a prolific NFL offensive world we live in. I think more specifically, slot corner, I would probably say is number one because you got to deal with everything. At least for an outside corner, the run fit responsibilities are a little bit less intense. But slot corner, you are a linebacker, you are a corner, you are a safety, you are doing it all. It's physical. You got to deal with linemen, you got to deal with receivers, these big slot receivers, where receivers getting kicked inside. It is a lot to handle, and that's kind of one reason why I really bang the table for this team finding that, long term great option at slot corner because I think it is one of the most physically and mentally demanding positions in the NFL.
And a lot of times you're a little bit undersized in that position and have to tackle
Yeah.
some of these big Derrick Henrys and
Right.
help set the edge against offensive linemen coming after you and sitting you down. And yeah, I think that's a fair assessment there. All right, let's move on to Rob Jones here. It says, I know it's crying over spilt milk, but with where we are and what we know now, I would have been completely enthusiastic if they would have signed Justin Fields for the same or slightly more than the Jets in 2 years, fully guaranteed. He says, I love Mason. He says, unfortunately, he does not give us the same chance to hit on a lottery ticket. We could have then drafted a quarterback next year while playing the highest selected first round pick we have ever at a quarterback in the building. The con artist did not live up to his name with the way things went down. So he's lamenting the departure of Justin Fields.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I wanted to bring back Justin Fields too, not to believe he was definitely the answer, but a relatively low cost investment to see what he potentially could be over a longer time horizon, starting fully in 2025. And if he hits, as the reader said, then great. If not, then you're still looking at the draft to find that future. So I think that was the best way to go about it from an upside standpoint, a skill set standpoint, a continuity standpoint, a cost standpoint. So yeah, it's certainly reasonable to be disappointed, especially even knowing that Aaron Rodgers is a better quarterback, a better passer than Justin Fields, but not being that long-term option, and you wonder, does adding Rodgers, presumably, if that occurs, that, does he make you a Super Bowl contender? I would say no. And so what are you hoping to get here is the question for Pittsburgh.
Let's take one from Cordell Carter. You mentioned on Friday's podcast that Pittsburgh doesn't like to do contracts with a ton of incentives, i.e., Russell Wilson's contract with the Giants. Beyond them being seemingly allergic to anything resembling analytics, it seems to me contracts with incentives can be relatively easy way to inflate the value of contracts, which is a win for the player and their agent while being cap friendly. And hell, if a player does reach the not likely to be earned incentives, he's probably had a pretty good season, which is a win for the team. He says, here's a fun exercise, Dave. This will never happen, but let's pretend the Steelers wanted to craft an incentive-laden contract for George Pickens to keep him happy, and let's assume it's just a 2-year extension that pays him like a top 15 wide receiver and is structured in a way to give the team an out after the season, assuming he continues to be a knucklehead. What would it look like, and what would the cap hit be? I'm not even going to go down that road because it's just something to look. You want an idea? A team that does a lot of incentives is the New England Patriots. Go look at even though it's probably not one for one. Go look at what they just did with who they just signed, Diggs.
Mhm.
I think that's got some incentives in it. I'm not even going to sit here and try to craft an incentive laden contract for George Pickens on a 2-year extension with all the thing, because it's a fruitless exercise, to be quite honest with you. I think the heart of the matter is why don't the Steelers do it, and will they ever do it? Why don't they like to do it? That's the biggest thing here when it comes to all that.
And the answers for why they don't like to do it are primarily what do you think, Dave?
I just don't think they like some guys having incentives and some guys not. And they'd much rather players not have to play with incentives over their head, and maybe thinking, well, if we give the incentives to one guy, should we, will other guys feel miffed about them not having incentives to earn more money in their contracts?
Yeah, I think the reasons are twofold. A bit of what you're saying, but also just potential tension that can create. Oh, I'm not getting the ball because I got incentives in my contract that if I'm I'm 3 catches away from hitting this $500,000 trigger, and they're not throwing me the football because they don't want to pay me, or you get some of that stuff, and it has truly happened before where you've had, not that this is a reliable narrator, but AB had that commentary when Tampa Bay, I think, in the last year of his career. That kind of stuff has happened before. Also, and you can speak to this better than I can, Dave. There's some level of cap uncertainty when it comes to incentives, right? For the not likely to be earned. Okay, what's our cap situation going to be for next year? Well, this guy's got $2 million and not likely to be earned incentive that's applying to next year. Are we going to have that money? Are we going to not? It's hard to say how we're going to map this thing out, and so that's not going to be a huge impact on your cap. That stuff could add up if you have a lot of those types of contracts. And I think any sort of lesser cap clarity puts you at a disadvantage in terms of trying to map out your short and long term plans.
Yeah, when it comes to those not likely to be earned, you have to plan as if those things might get earned, and it increases the level of uh you hear them talk about putting a puzzle together every off season and making it all fit. So it does add a level of uncertainty, if you will, when it comes to that. But other teams are obviously able to function around it.
Yeah, it's manageable, but it's just one other thing you have to consider. It's more restrictive if you have to reduce your cap space under these built-in incentive assumptions. And yes, if it doesn't happen, it's kind of pennies from heaven, and you get some more cap space. But your cap space is always kind of this moving target, and it always is. I know, I understand that big picture, but the more clarity you can give yourself cap wise, the easier it is to navigate. I think Pittsburgh appreciates that.
I just would like to at once hear maybe Omar Khan ask the question about it in one of these several interviews.
What do you think he would say? See, he's probably not going to give you the
Yeah,
straight
he's not going to get, but at least ask him about
Sure.
it.
No, I agree. I'm just curious, like, do you give you a half truth or just like, yeah, it's never been, he'd probably say it's just never been our style, never been the philosophy, and we're gonna stick with it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that would probably be his answer, but you don't know unless he's asked.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would love for him to get a different question other than just quarterback for the 77th time. But yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a worthwhile question, especially given his cap background.
All right. Let's see here if I got one more maybe in here. Damian Anderson. Let's give Mason a chance. No Rodgers, no high drafted quarterback. Tomlin got wins with Mason prior to our so-called commitment to the run game. If he does it again, great. If he doesn't, we walk into 2026 with money to spend and high draft equity. So Damian would rather see this team give Mason a chance, and he does not want Rodgers or a high drafted quarterback.
All right. Fair enough. We shall see if that ends up happening or not as we continue to wait on a Rodgers decision.
All right. One last one. Jason Chadwell. Hi, Dave and Alex. Happy Friday. This came in on Friday. Every offseason, I try to rank the team's draft needs from post-free agency based on the number of picks. They are currently slated for 6 picks. Below is my current list with defensive lineman highest need and wide receiver as the lowest, he says. Assuming Rodgers signs, his list is defensive line, running back, offensive line depth, cornerback, safety, wide receiver. Based on these position groups, how would you rank them based on team need today? All right. I obviously would go defensive line first. Second. Boy, you could make strong arguments for the other positions, all of them here. I mean, safety, you got some questions past this year. You got the team paying a lot of attention to the safety to some degree during the pre-draft process. The offensive line depth, if you've done it right so far, I mean, the depth is still in question. So, but even so, is that enough to add maybe a second or a third round pick? And yes, I know they don't have a second round or pick right now. So I would push offensive line. I don't know if I'd have offensive line depth third like Jason has here. Running back, corner, and wide receiver feel really interchangeable potentially as the second pick. I will go. Alex made such a good argument about corner earlier in the show. I would put corner either second or third. I would put wide receiver probably second or third as well too, whichever one interchangeable there. So I'll go this way. Defensive line, corner, wide receiver, running back, safety, offensive line depth. But, I mean, you can make strong arguments for running back, offensive line depth, cornerback, safety, wide receiver, as anything behind defensive line being top.
And he did not put quarterback on that list, correct?
He did not put
Okay.
quarterback on that list.
I don't mean to reject the premise of the question. I'll try to answer the best I can, but I don't like to rank them in that style. I like to rank them in needs, wants, and we're good in terms of what are our needs, put them in one bucket. What are our wants, a second bucket, and the we're good. We don't really have to address it in the draft in the third bucket. And that way I can just focus on, I don't have to rank him in terms of 1 and 7 because 1 and 7 could still be needs. And I can really just focus on the talent at that point. But so he framed it as offensive line or offensive line depth in terms
He
of
has he specifically has O-line depth here. And that's the only position that he put depth next to.
on. I will try to rank them this way, and I'm looking at the email. I might be missing a position or two. D-line 1, I'm with you. I'll put O-line depth 2, running back 3, and then corner and receiver, and then safety. I don't know exactly where those fit. Those feel a little more interchangeable. Now, to be clear, when I say O-line depth 2, does not mean you have to draft offensive line first. It just says in terms of need. How do you address offensive line depth? It can be in different ways. It can be really, I want more veterans in for agency. And so ranking it number 2 does not mean it has to be addressed in that order necessarily. But in terms of just what are the needs for the team, I see that as a huge need and concern for Pittsburgh right now. And that's why I kind of like using the buckets more so than just a list of top needs. Because when you list them out that way, it sounds a little funny. But I think offensive line depth is a serious need.
All right, defensive lineman, if they draft him, wherever they draft a defensive lineman this year, you can get that. You should be assuming it's a top, top pedigree class player. You can get that guy on the field early in his rookie season, right?
Oh, sure. The opportunity is there if the guy plays up to your expectations. I mean, what positions would you draft that would struggle to see the field year one? I guess outside corner would be tough based on current construction.
And that's where I was going with this is what other position in the top 3 rounds of the draft could this team draft this year based on what they have right now that would allow that player to get on the field sooner rather than later?
Yeah, D-line, running back. I think safety, you could carve out certainly your role for that. Those are kind of the 3 that come to mind. I think receiver's going to be tougher. A slot corner could, if it's an outside corner, I think it'd be tough to do, barring injury, of course. That's kind of where I'm at.
I mean, running back's probably the easiest of the offensive skill positions to get on the field, especially in the state of this team right now, right?
Yeah, certainly.
All right, good question. Once again, I think once you get past defensive line, you can make strong arguments for the order there. And obviously, he does not have quarterback on the list. And where we sit right now, it certainly does feel this team's going to draft a quarterback somewhere. I don't think in the first round, but I think they're going to go that route.
You think quarterback? I'm sorry, in later stages of the draft?
At some point past round 1.
Okay.
I definitely think it's going to be on the table. I'll be surprised if we're talking at the end of the draft of this team not drafting a quarterback at some point.
No, or I should say, more likely a quarterback gets drafted in the 3rd or 4th round, or
3rd or
5th
4th
round and beyond. Okay,
3rd or 4th. Yeah, I think it's going to be somewhere along those Milroe, Shuck, Howard, something around those lines.
Agreed.
All right, we got questions out of the way there. We're about, I guess, an hour and 45 in this, so we were able to fill it up like a Seinfeld show. We will come back on Wednesday. We'll have all of the Omar Khan comments parsed at that time. We'll see if this team has any other news to talk about when we get to that point. Start diving deeper. Time to dive deeper into some of these draft prospects as well too. So it's about that time. So we'll start getting into that probably more on the Wednesday show. Friday, Alex is probably not going to be part of the show. He's got procedure coming up that's probably going to sideline him. So look for me, Ross, and I think Josh Carney maybe to handle the Friday show. And we'll welcome back Alex on Monday, probably after that. So just a little bit of heads up towards the end of the week there. So in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button. Also, let's see, we got an app out there at the iOS store if you want to go download that and play along with that as well. So until Wednesday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.